Before we get into the recap and commentary aspect for Season 2, I would like to reiterate exactly why the dialogue in this show is so great, and how the common praise for the dialogue I also slightly disagree with. Praise about the dialogue seems to pertain around certain louder moments of the show. There's this clip on YouTube that features in one of the episodes we'll go over here in this video that has a lot of views entitled The Best Black Lagoon Scene. This might easily be my least favourite scene in the show, but this video has a shit ton of views and overwhelmingly positive comments, talking about how badass this scene is, and I just roll my eyes when I see it. This scene is terrible anime garbage, terrible over-the-top expressions and dialogue that feels out of place with its bombast. The best moments in Black Lagoon are the quiet ones, with Yukio and Rock in the bowling alley, Balalaika and Rock's standoff, and especially in Revy and Rock's submarine scene. There's another YouTube video called Revy's Speech, which basically serves as a lyric video for Revy's guess what? Speech from the submarine scene. The video has everything removed but the audio and the OST. It really gives you a feel of the power of the acting here. Everything she says here is believable, and as I mentioned before, the way she cuts off his sympathetic apology with a simple fuck you is unbelievable. This type of scene is more common in Black Lagoon, but they seem to be passed over in favour of more bombastic action scenes, and that pisses me off a little bit. Anyway, now that that's been clarified, let's move on to talking about the vampires. We have finally arrived at the first of what I would consider to be the big three arcs of Black Lagoon, the Vampire Twins arc. This arc, the Japan arc, and Roberta's Blood Trail stand head and shoulders above the rest in my opinion. Not that I don't love the Greenback Jane arc or the Nazi arc, or that I don't think the previous 2-episode arc is severely underrated, but these 3 arcs are the lifeblood of the series. These arcs bring in more of the cast than the other singular seeming adventures and have the best situations and circumstances for great dialogue and character growth, especially with Rock. These 3 arcs shape Rock as a character, and all Revy can do is sit back and watch her saviour fall. We open episode 13 with Rock being informed of what everyone else seems to already be aware of. There's been a string of weird murders throughout the city. But then they tell him some of the people hit were from Hotel Moscow, which immediately changes everything. I love that the audience, and by proxy Rock, immediately understand the severity of this fucking situation, and immediately understand that Balalaika is about to fucking destroy everything. We know this because of how effectively the city and Hotel Moscow have been built up so far in the series. This hinges on something Chang will admit to in Roberta's Blood Trail. Roanopa is incredibly fragile, and outsiders that don't understand how the city is structured could fuck it all up. And just look at what the twins accomplish in such little time with such little ease. This will become a much bigger problem when the Americans show up. To end the conversation, Revy mentions that before this is all over, everyone will be knees deep in blood, which is a cool line and even better foreshadowing. Obviously, like before, we won't be discussing the twins unless it relates to Rock or Revy, because otherwise this video would end up being shame A length, which I would love but simply don't have the time to do. Just know that it's fucking outstanding, and how they are built up to be both the most despicable and sympathetic people in the show is fucking remarkable, and a true endorsement of the writing of this show. Almost to contradict that last statement, we will be analysing the meeting regarding Roanopa's power structure, because that will factor into the discussion about Rock and Revy and Roberta's Blood Trail later on. So here we have a meeting between the heads of the separate mafias in Roanopa, the Russians, the Chinese, the Italians, and the Colombians, with Balalaika and Chang being the ones we are most familiar with. This scene is highly entertaining while giving fantastic insight into how Roanopa functions, which will be an increasingly more important factor in the plot moving forward and really wasn't even relevant in the first season. Chang is forced to play peacekeeper here. As we know, he is number 1, having defended against Hotel Moscow's attempt to seize power right before the series began. Hotel Moscow is clearly number 2, however our Italian friend will come to know that in the coming days. Balalaika insults everybody and is clearly pissed at the death of her men. She even directly says to Chang that she isn't happy with the current arrangements in the city, and that she is still coming for that top spot. Nothing is gathered from the meeting because everyone denies it and no one has any proof that anyone else is doing anything right now. They all assume that they are too smart to do any of this. Balalaika has a perfect line that displays both her anger, confusion, and desperation when she asks, "What's going on, Chang?"
Affiliated executive in a whorehouse on Rockiata Street. They were killed the same way yours were.
What's going on, Chang?
There's perfect delivery from Balalaika's voice actress here. They conclude that it has to be an outsider, and before Balalaika storms out, she warns that she will kill the families and loved ones of everyone that's in any way responsible for any of this. We cut to the yellow flag where Rock and Revy are talking about the situation, and they point out that everyone in the bar is ready for a fight. Bao then lets them know about the bounty put out by Balalaika. Revy explains that it is strange that they can't find the culprit in the city, therefore someone from the city must be hiding them somewhere. Everyone mentions that how similar this situation is to the Roberta situation, and I love the continuity and the fact that they bring her up here. It's fucking fantastic. Ada then enters the room looking strikingly different and far more scandalous than her normal church outfit. So much so that it takes a while for Rock to figure out who she is.
Mommy, give me Milkies.
She immediately comes onto Rock, even buffing out her chest and insulting Revy. But Revy interferes here, possibly because Eda is pissing her off or because she's protective of Rock and wants him for herself. But this isn't enough evidence to point either way. Eda debuts her nickname for Rock here, calling him Romeo. Revy then subtly calls Eda a slut by explaining that her night isn't over till she's getting banged by some stranger. A slutty church girl who's secretly the most powerful person in the city and a member of the CIA. She's perfect.
Mommy, give me Milkies.
Eda notably calls this situation the Assassin Olympics because people are coming to the city from all across the world for this bounty. Revy and Eda agree to work together to get the bounty because they are friends/rivals after all. Eda notes that Hotel Moscow is indeed ready for a war, and Rock and Revy have the appropriate response. Then we get the reveal that the Italians hired the twins as assassins to try and take out Balalaika, but things aren't going smoothly for them, but more on that next episode. We then get a neat speech from Dutch where he explains that the crazy pure evil people that show up in Roanoke from time to time always get dealt with quickly. Revy says that those people remind her of the people she met in prison, giving more insight into her backstory. Balalaika then calls Rock and tries to get information about the language the twins used in a recent hit. She got this information earlier from the cops in the episode. She is low-key insulting Rock here. She's always playfully insulting him and mocks his white-collar attitude, sort of like Revy used to. He gives the big reveal that they're Romanian to end the episode. Hotel Moscow immediately goes after Rowan, the owner of the pawn shop/strip club that we met in episode 7. Isn't it neat how everything comes together? Continuity, man. He is justifiably terrified even though he actually has nothing to fear. They just ask him about his collection, more specifically, his collection of child pornography. Then we get one of my favourite scenes in the entire show, even if that sentence is becoming redundant at this point. This private meeting with Balalaika and Chang here. Everything about this scene is perfect. The atmosphere with the overcast day and the rain, plus the music and the tone of the conversation, my god, the tension is palpable here. This is number 1 and number 2 agreeing to work together. It's monumental. The details of this conversation largely relate to the plot, so we won't analyze it here, but please rewatch this scene. It's unbelievable that these two, who have seen and done just about everything theoretically possible to a person, find themselves mutually disgusted by the most tragic backstory in anime history. It's awesome. The monumentality that this scene captures and portrays is excellent. The dialogue and voice work again pull through and make this scene. They also have a neat little flirty dynamic when it comes down to just the two of them, and that adds another further layer to the conversation here. This is fucking unbelievable stuff. They ultimately agree that they will not take sympathy for the twins and agree to take them out and the Italians together. While rewatching that scene, I made an interesting observation. The scenes in Black Lagoon throughout the series are fucking long and it's great. This scene nearly takes up half an episode and it's just two characters with detailed history talking about current events in the story and just shooting the shit. Constantly after this, I noticed that scenes would take up entire halves of episodes or quarters of episodes. This shows that these characters can carry outstanding scenes and go on for ages without boring the audience. This scene was only allowed to build that palpable tension and atmosphere because it was given enough time to breathe. And because of this breathing space, the characters feel real. The show is the best, what can I say? Now back to the episode. Before Chang and Balalaika can get to the Italians, the twins take out all their main staff because they can't be controlled and indeed are insane. While this is happening, everyone in the city begins descending on the location, including Revy, Eda, Hotel Moscow, Chang, and the police. Chang and the twins have a neat, cute moment of mutual respect as neither can kill each other. All of Chang's men, however, weren't as lucky. We cut back to Revy and Etta, who are in a hideout with every fucking idiot in the city. Revy is adorably in the middle of this huddle of idiots because she's not exactly the smartest, while Etta is leaning against the wall thinking about a better plan. Etta figures out that this isn't the place they will show up in, and they decide to go another route because this one is too obvious, and Hotel Moscow isn't around, so this can't be the spot. The dialogue in this scene is also unbelievably great, for exactly different reasons than the great scene earlier in the episode. This one is intentionally funny, while the other was intentionally draining. This gives levity to the otherwise cripplingly depressing storyline. Their back and forth is my favourite in the entire show. Them fucking with each other and insulting each other is the best. I played this scene in part 1, so go check it out there, but I may as well put it back in again.
For someone with no education, you catch on pretty quick, Revy. So what do you think? What's the fastest route from here to Hotel Moscow? We're gonna have to use back streets.
We'll cut through Chalkwam Market, and then it's just straight down Satnam Street. But more importantly, last time I checked, you had no education either, you fucking whore.
Additionally, Etta is constantly making references to America, which is hilarious, and is further foreshadowing for our larger role in the plot. Revy and Etta figure out that Hotel Moscow is leading the twins down certain routes and intercepts them. They are offered money by the twins, which actually tempts Etta, but Revy comes out of hiding and says that they will just kill them both, take the money from the bounty, and then take the money off their bodies. Revy is shown being the smarter one in this high-pressure situation. It's safe to say that she's probably done more hold-ups than Etta. Hotel Moscow figures out that Etta and Revy have interrupted the plan, and Balalaika gives the okay to take them out if need be. The episode ends with a tease of possible conflict between Hotel Moscow and Revy and Etta. Episode 15 opens with the same scenario episode 14 ended with, the standoff between the twins and Revy and Etta. Etta shows some apprehension here, showing off her inexperience in this sort of situation. Etta isn't like all the others in Reupload, she's only pretending to be like them while undercover. She seems to believe in what she's doing as a CIA agent, and it's probably moralistic to some extent. No one ever talks about the gutter mud on her boots. So here it's great characterization that she isn't willing to shoot these kids on sight like Balalaika or Revy are. She's different from them. Etta then fucks up again by nearly shooting at Hotel Moscow, but Revy saves her before she does anything extremely stupid. The twins themselves get away in the commotion and decide to split up. This is the last time they will ever see each other, which is a little morbid. Afterwards, we cut back to the scene with Revy and Etta, and they are both pissed that the money got away. They then turn on each other, insulting each other with some great one-liners, and then threaten to kill each other. When the tension peaks, they both calm down and agree that they are too exhausted to fight each other. They split up much to Etta's dismay, and Etta demands Revy escort her back to her car. She pulls the friend card out even. But Revy tells her to fuck off. Etta is then confronted by the female twin, though that might always be in doubt. She starts groping Etta, and it's all a little bit fucked up until Etta agrees to take her to the Lagoon company to get her out of Reupload. We then get a scene of Balalaika preparing to kill the other twin. This scene, as the commander says afterwards, is chilling. Sadly, because once again this is irrelevant to Rock and Revy, we won't be analysing it in depth. Just once again know that it's outstanding, and the voice work and atmosphere here are masterful. The line, "I said kneel," is ingrained into my subconscious, and the way the sniper rips the child's body apart is abhorrent yet entirely vicariously satisfying, because we are positioned to side with Balalaika here, unquestionably. She may be evil, but we understand her and understand why she's doing what she's doing here, whereas the twins are more of an oddity, to say the least. We cut back to the Lagoon that's currently transporting the remaining twin offshore, and we hear her singing The World of Midnight, which, as I mentioned in part 2, is the best piece of music on the Black Lagoon soundtrack. This song may be my favourite song in all of anime. It's just a song that I love in general. Sure, it's audibly appealing to me, but it represents everything the show stands for, and both the show and the twins are embedded into the song's appeal, even when I listen to them outside of the context of the show. Arcada, who I slightly made fun of in the intro of part 1, perfectly described this song in his video.
The World of Midnight is this rather eerie yet calming vocal-only choir song used in the series Black Lagoon to highlight the story of two characters, referred to as the twins. Orphans abused for their heritage that leads them to become heavily emotionally scarred and quite psychotic to boot. This little lullaby is played at the culmination of their story, which, not to spoil it, is rather bittersweet. Now, technically it was played as an ED, but it was the one and only time where the show's traditional ending had its music replaced. Hell, it even changed the ED visuals from one where Revy is walking onto a beach to one where it's just the twins for added effect. These twins were not meant to just be any old one-off set of villains. The show realized how different these characters were, and their swan song sounds all the better for it.
Its mere appearance here in the show gives me chills. Rock claps after she finishes singing and praises her for her ability to sing. This scene is similar and likely a direct parallel to the scene with Garcia in the cabin from before. But in that episode, Rock didn't entirely fall for the sob story, but in this one he falls for it, and he falls for it bad. Revy is shown sitting outside just in case something happens. She clearly doesn't want her fucking with Rock, because she's protective of him and now wants him to avoid falling into the darkness of the underworld. The twin notes here that it seems like Rock is living in a different world from everybody else. Rock responds saying that he's just not used to the job yet. She then tells Rock that he's nice and talks about always wanting to see the beautiful sea in the sky. The wholesome nature of this scene points out the key juxtaposition here. The twins were not born as crazy murdering lunatics. They were corrupted and moulded into this by the cruelty of far worse human beings. We learn about this backstory back with the conversation between Chang and Balalaika, and she reiterates on it here, talking about pissing blood constantly and getting beaten. She says that upbringing taught her that this is the only way the world works. The creepiness and despair is then turned up a millionfold when she changes her voice and becomes the other twin. Rock grabs her and tries to help her, screaming that she's wrong and that this is not all that life is, and he even starts crying here. She notices how nice he's being and attempts to reward him with a sexual favor. This breaks Rock and makes him leave the cabin. Revy notices the state he's in and thinks it must have been the girl's fault and beats the shit out of her. This situation somehow continues to get more fucked up. We cut to Rock on the deck, who's freaking out and kicking shit around. Benny comes out and tries to calm him down, explaining that it's best not to involve himself and not to get too attached because that's the only way to survive with some sort of semblance of sanity in this world. This confirms that Benny's strategy all along has been to ignore the problem and stay out of it, and for him it seems to be working, but Rock refuses to be so easily defeated. Rock lashes out at Benny, even grabbing him, but Benny reasons with him and explains that he can't save her and that she's too far gone at this point. Benny shoots down the possibility of Rock adopting her and shielding her, and explains that he can't undo what's already been done to her. He talks about a fantasy world that maybe things have gone differently and they'd ended up making friends in school and living a normal life, but this story conversely is not going to have a happy ending. The scene ends here, but Rock knows what Benny is saying is true. There is no saving her at this point. She's just too far gone. And this will be reflected on in the next scene and the final scene of this arc. We cut to the dock and the girl jumps off the boat and Rock watches over her as she looks up at the beautiful sky and sea. She wholesomely tells Rock that if they ever meet again that they'll have a picnic. He responds saying that would be wonderful. She is then immediately shot by a dude on the dock. Rock lets out a gasp but doesn't seem to scream as he has lost hope for her, and in a second will admit that this is what's best for her at this point. This also shows that he is changing. Season 1 Rock would probably have screamed, but now he's developed tougher skin. This city and his chosen lifestyle is definitely getting to him at this point. Revy isn't noticing, but he is changing, and for the worse. How could he not be? This is one hell of an abyss to look into, and expect for it not to look back. The dude then has a talk with Dutch. They seem to have been mutual friends in the past. He talks about his own tragic backstory to really put over the nihilistic themes of this arc. This is all about people being pushed to the worst out of desperation. It's another explosion of emotions here, just in a far different fashion to the cigarette kiss scene. He explains that his 34-year-old son has cancer and that the payoff he's getting might save his son's life, and announces that this is his final job, and he walks away not even looking back at the child he just executed. Revy melancholically points out how fucking tragic this entire situation is. Rock says this end was fitting for her and finds some solace in the fact that she can now watch the beautiful skies she wanted to see while she sleeps. The world of Midnight starts playing, and we soon learn that it will be replacing the ordinary ED for this episode and this episode only. Not only that, but Revy in the ending has been replaced with one of the twins walking on the beach, who meets up with the other twin at the end of the outro, and they hold hands looking into the sky. Maybe in the afterlife they found some peace together. Black Lagoon seems to be saying here that there was no hope for this situation. If we can break from linearity here, even in the Roberta situation in the end, when she attempts to murder the US national soldiers, there's hope for her and Rock saves her somehow. But comparing this situation to that, there's no hope here. Or at least the show says there's no hope here. Sometimes the world doesn't give people a chance to ever be happy, and life is truly only suffering and misery. That's the message communicated in this arc. There isn't always hope, and sometimes it's best just to put something out of its misery. Think about that the next time you listen to The World of Midnight, and have the sadness engulf you. This was an incredible 3-episode stretch of emotion, themes, and character development, but I sure did love that fucking action. Fuck me. After that full frontal assault of a previous arc, we now enter the Greenback Jane arc that serves mainly to establish Etta as the 4th most prominent and important character in Black Lagoon besides Revy, Rock, and Balalaika. The arc is also a lot less serious and a lot funnier than the previous one, to add some levity to the series before we jump into the Japan arc, which is quite full on. The episode opens with Revy waking up in a destroyed and still messy room. She complains about it being hot as fuck and there being bullet holes in the wall. She reflects on her actions and concludes that maybe she shouldn't get so wasted next time. They talk about guns and bullshit while they continue to reiterate on how hot it is right now in Roanoke. Etta then brings up Rock again, calling him a handsome sailor, and mentions that it's been nearly a year since he first joined the Lagoon Company. It's neat whenever we get little updates on the passage of time. It gives us context to the larger world of the show. Revy goes on a rant about him not being anything special and makes fun of him for not wanting to get rid of his shirt and tie, and for always getting kidnapped and being a total stiff. Whatever that means. Etta cuts her off and cuts to the chase. The fact that she doesn't deny it and just avoids the question here is interesting. But ultimately here it is not confirmed nor denied, and Revy changes the subject by complaining about how hot it is again. My verdict, because of the context clues later, there's no way they're actually fucking at this point. But she sure does make it seem like they are with this response. Jane then knocks on the door asking for help and protection. She was introduced earlier in the episode, but as we have mentioned before multiple times at this point, because it isn't directly related to Rock and or Revy, we skipped over it. Both Revy and Etta are completely disinterested in helping her. They are only spurred into action when a bullet from one of the attackers nearly hits Etta in the head and shatters the glass in Revy's hand. This is one of the few moments in Black Lagoon the dialogue turns into terrible anime garbage. I hate this scene and everything about it. They finish off each other's terribly bombastic sentences and it pisses me off. A new guy called Rico shows up and helps them. He's yet to ever be important to the plot. Maybe he is in a future manga storyline or something. The headmistress shows up and gets mad at Etta for drinking in the chapel, but then starts shooting as well. This is supposed to be funny and endearing, but I hate it. After that shit, we get a scene where Jane explains her job to everyone. The joke is here that she talks a lot and doesn't know when to stop herself. She's clearly passionate about what she does and has a drive foreign to most people in Roanoke. Revy and Etta progressively get more and more pissed off at her babbling. Revy complains about her attitude, saying that she reminds her of a bitch back at her childhood welfare center, which is a pretty funny line and also adds to Revy's fucked up past. Jane plays a game with Revy and tries to get her to determine which dollar bill is fake, and of course she gets it wrong after being overconfident. After she finishes her supposed sob story, Revy and Etta conclude that it's all her fault because she couldn't keep up her end of the deal. Jane gets mad at this and Revy threatens to shoot her. The head sister points out to Jane that for the right price, Revy may be able to get her out of the city. She makes a bad offer and they tell her to go die someplace else. Jane yells at them and asks them aren't they supposed to be nuns because they aren't very helpful. Etta then uses scripture to justify everything they have done so far. There's a neat commentary going on here where Etta uses scripture to justify just about anything and everything, because there are Bible verses that can be used to justify just about anything, even if two things contradict one another. Etta then plays a little trick on Jane and gets her to stay at a certain place and makes her give her a $300 donation to the church. The head sister praises Etta for being forward-thinking, and Revy doesn't understand because, as we have established, she's not exactly the elaborate plan type. Etta calls the people hunting Jane and tip them off to her soon-to-be location. Revy calls her a nasty bitch, having now figured it out. We cut to Etta and Revy at the yellow flag. Revy wants payment for being involved in the trick Etta pulled earlier. Etta ensures her that after the plan is executed properly, they will both have big payoffs. Etta is a smart girl and has thought this all through. Rock brings the car around and they get out of there. They're all going on a little three-way adventure. Right as they leave, a wonderful cast of returning and new characters show up, including Chinglish, Sawyer, and the Wizard. They are the characters that will be hunting Jane throughout this arc, which unfortunately puts them at odds with our main girls. We cut to Etta, Rock, and Revy waiting outside the hotel Etta suggested to Jane earlier to end the episode, with Etta promising that some exciting shit is about to go down. Episode 17 opens up with another one of Rock's monologues. This time specifically it focuses on the noose hanging over the entrance of the city. He talks about it being a warning to sane people, scaring them away, and an invitation to those who are wild at heart. Rock here is calling himself wild at heart, which I guess is true. He goes on to describe the various groups that are collected in the city and describes Reupload as the final stop before hell. Rock then gets to a semblance of a point by saying that he only survived this long because of Benny, Dutch, and Revy. This monologue is very well written and interesting, but comes completely out of nowhere and has no bearing on the plot. My guess is this was created to fill time in the episode. We cut back to the plot and Rock asks why they are waiting here. Etta says $1 million is at stake, and Rock interprets that meaning that there's going to be a gunfight, something he dreads. Revy shows how different she is from him by getting excited at the prospect of a fight breaking out. Revy also doubts Etta, saying that she's been blinded by greed. When Rock laments again the possibility of a gunfight, Etta takes up the opportunity to hit on him, saying that she can't let him die yet because they haven't even got to know each other yet. Revy then gets pissed off and ruins Etta's attempt again. Etta then acknowledges Revy's sudden jealousy. Revy doesn't even respond to that. Imagine if the show was an anime where she started blushing and doubled down on her jealous outburst. I just thought of an interesting subtextual dynamic here between Etta and Rock while writing the script for this part of the video. Is it possible that Etta is attracted to Rock because he's the only other person in the city who isn't a complete piece of shit? Does she relate to his moral courage and believe that he is similar to herself? She is CIA, and everything we see from her, at least before the end of Roberta's blood trail, is at least slightly an act, so we can't be sure of it, but it would be interesting if Etta saw Rock as the light in the endless sea of darkness in Reupload. Just a tangential food for thought. The Etta then explains the plan to the two of them and reveals that Rock was right and there really is going to be a gunfight. Revy verbally doubts the plan again, but Etta reiterates, saying that the worst case scenario is just that Jane dies, which they don't really care about. Rock then doubts the plan as well, but it all works out in the end. While Etta was explaining the plan, we were actually periodically being shown the plan being executed perfectly. Rock and Revy nearly fuck it up by leaving, but Jane comes running out down the alley. Etta successfully extorts her for more money, and everything works out. The plan is a go-ahead. The assassins come chasing and ask what the hell they're doing, and Etta just mercilessly kills one of them that wasn't even attacking her, which is pretty fucked up, but it was a little funny. They then run into a massive roadblock in the plan. The boat isn't at the dock. Dutch and Benny are off receiving a shipment, and Etta's plan completely falls apart. They regroup in the Lagoon office building and come up with a new plan. This scene is great for character interactions.
What the hell have you been smoking, Etta? That's Dutch's. I swear, if you so much as lick that bottle, I'm gonna beat the shit out of you and shove a beer up your ass.
Fuck you too.
We then see Dutch and Benny out on a pickup mission. Dutch mentions here that the filth of the city rubs off on all of them, when Benny implies that he thought he and Rock were exceptions to that rule. Dutch says that he sensed something dark inside both of them from the beginning, and that was indicative of him hiring them. It's interesting that Dutch would say this about Benny, who we really haven't seen the city affect, and mentions that he's always sensed something dark inside of Rock. Dutch is smart and also a master manipulator. The assassins show up and the fight is on. Rock and Revy work together nicely again. Revy tells Rock to take Jane to the back of the door, and he agrees. Etta praises him for his bravery, and then Revy interrupts, saying that he's still got a long way to go. Fucking characterization, unbelievable characterization that flows into the conversation dialogue and to the plot. This fucking show, man. When Rock and Jane attempt to leave through the back door, Sawyer appears and attacks them. In response to this, Rock literally cries for help. Revy then asks him what's wrong in a very motherly tone. Jane tells him to just shoot Sawyer, but Rock explains that he doesn't carry a gun, and then she berates him for his stupidity. Revy attempts to save them, but is cut off by gunfire. She then decides to abandon Etta in favor of Rock when Chinglish attacks. Her and Revy have a cute moment of recognition. They even talk about our old pal, the Irish driver, who apparently got too high and never came back down. Another in the long list of tragic fates of Black Lagoon characters. Etta and Revy then come up with a plan to kill Chinglish, and she charges at them, possibly getting shot. The building begins to burn down because of the arsonist assassin that was introduced earlier in the arc. Jane starts relentlessly complaining on the roof to Rock, asking what the hell they're about to do. Rock yells at her, telling her to shut up and that he's thinking about it. The episode ends with these many cliffhanger moments left unanswered. It's time for Rock to once again be a tactical boy and somehow get them out of this situation. Episode 18 opens up with the reveal that Chinglish faked Revy out and went for the kill and nearly successfully did kill Etta. Revy and Etta act like they're splitting up for a reason that will become more apparent soon, and Revy hands Etta a gun. Chinglish and Etta have a funny back and forth about killing nuns and atheism, but Revy pops out after Chinglish assumed she had gone to the roof and shoots her from behind. Revy gets skewered by Chinglish's kunai and yells at Etta for tipping her off. Chinglish falls down, making it look like she's dead, but she really isn't. Rock and Jane get cornered on the roof by Sawyer as Dutch comes in, seeing the fire and getting hilariously pissed off. Sawyer starts monologuing on the roof, but the building collapses slightly, and she loses her speaking assistant and gets depressed, taking her out of the hunt. Revy and Etta catch up to Rock and Jane. Rock shows some concern for Revy, pointing out that she's bleeding. She plays it off like it's nothing and it doesn't hurt, when a minute ago she was just screaming and yelling at Etta for being responsible for it. She likes to act tough around Rock. As the building continues to collapse, the wizard guy shows up with his trademark ecstatic entrance, but is immediately shot by Revy. Luckily for him, he was wearing a bulletproof vest. As the building finally collapses, Rock does save Jane from nearly getting squashed by pushing her out of the way, showing that he's brave and at least somewhat of a hero still. They survive the fall and head for the ship as it's turning up. They make it on board, but so do some of the assassins. On the ship, they all begin working together again. Dutch starts driving, Revy starts shooting, and Benny and Rock work with Jane to get the rest of the money. Benny and Jane develop a thing throughout the episode. Dutch causes the ship to shake violently, which shakes off a bunch of idiots. Outside on the deck, Revy keeps killing idiots. Etta heads down to the cargo to deal with the cowboy that's been orchestrating the entire mission the entire time, and Revy stays on the deck to deal with the arsonist boy. These characters are all interesting, but once again they have nothing to do with Rock or Revy, so we'll be moving on. Benny figures out how to access the account Jane needs to complete the job. She gets turned on by this, and they make out while Rock just stands there awkwardly. Revy kills the arsonist guy after he brags about burning his wife to death, and Dutch shakes the boat again to get rid of the rest of the stragglers. The only one left now is the cowboy Etta is dealing with. We then get the reveal that Etta is a CIA agent while she talks to the cowboy, who says he recognized her from a meeting in Washington, D.C. that he was at. Everything about this scene is great, and the way it builds up the tension and the reveal here is masterful. This is another one I would highly encourage you to all go back and watch. Notably, for the first time, Etta's bright blue eyes are exposed in this scene. Whenever she takes her glasses off, it symbolizes her transforming back into a CIA agent. The moments before the cowboy is killed are great, and it really makes the reveal. Langley, Virginia is the home of the headquarters of the CIA, if you weren't aware. That's why he puts it together right after she reveals her hometown. This reveal changes everything about the show, and we now understand that the CIA has its seemingly ubiquitous claws in Roanoke, and are monitoring or profiting off of the exploits here. The CIA is obviously part of America, so they have a bigger swinging dick than the Triad or Hotel Moscow could ever hope to have. The CIA activity in Roanoke is only implied as of this episode, but as we will learn in Roberta's blood trail, they become far more directly involved.
Afraid you're mistaken. It's not me. I'm just a goddamn nun from the Rip-Off Church. But I'll tell you one thing, and this is God's own truth. I wasn't born in Alabama. My hometown is actually Langley, Virginia.
Yo, CIA!
The episode and the arc ends with Etta returning to her role as a nun from the Rip-Off Church and reuniting with Revy, with them both having succeeded in their missions. This arc demonstrates how much the Lagoon Company now care about each other. In the episode, they all throw away money to save each other. This theme of stronger together is reflected by Chinglish, Sawyer, and the Wizard, who form a family-like relationship beginning in this arc, with the great scene where they all nearly die. This is the arc in the show where they are all on the same page and work together as a well-oiled machine. The tensions between them will all be brought back to the surface in the next two arcs. Episode 19 marks the beginning of another one of the three seminal arcs in Black Lagoon that I mentioned earlier in the video, the Japan arc. This may be my favourite overall, though all three of them are just so good. This is where we see everything slowly coming together with Rock and Revy right before Rock explodes in Roberta's blood trail. Additionally, my notes are far more detailed from this point on, so the analysis will get longer per episode. So let's get into it. We open with, guess what, a Rock narration. He mentions that it's still only been a year since he came to Reupload, placing this arc right next to the previous one in chronology. This is a little unscripted bit I'm putting in here. So in the comments of some of the previous videos, because obviously I wrote this script like 4 or 5 months ago, that's how long this has taken to get out, but in the comments of part 1 or 2, someone commented how they sort of rearranged the arcs in Black Lagoon from the manga, which is something I'm very interested in. So I don't know where this would take place regarding other arcs in the series. That's just a very interesting little tidbit that I don't think many people know that I should put in here, so that the arcs, and they sort of mess with the character dynamics here as well. Like that's why the characters don't really develop that much in the Greenback Jane arc, because it came earlier, I think, in the manga than it did in the anime. So that's just a little interesting thing to remember, even though I just brought up chronology here in the script. Anyway, back to your regularly scheduled programming. He says this will be the first time since then that he leaves the city. Notably, if you pay attention, there's a fantastic Easter egg here in Rock's room. If you look closely, you can see the famed Hawaiian shirt we've been talking about this entire time hanging up on his closet. It's nice to finally put a face to the name. He reveals that he's going back to Japan, a place that he says he used to call home. There's conflict in his voice here, which is interesting and will be addressed in the arc itself. Notably, he looks out the window and sees what is presumably Sawyer carving someone up in broad daylight. To show his character progression, he looks on, not caring at all, and smoking a cigarette. This city has clearly gotten to him. The Rock from even an arc ago probably would have been flipping out seeing something like this, but here he simply doesn't give a fuck. We immediately cut to Rock and Revy arriving in Japan, where notably it's the new year. Benny and Rock talk over the phone, and on Benny's computer we see a picture of Jane because continuity is great and I like it. They do talk about Jane and Revy like they are their girlfriends in this scene, and Benny even mentions that he's quite the ladies' man, and notes that Revy only went with him because she was worried about him. Really, her services aren't needed at all in Japan. She's not even armed when they initially get here. She's just there to comfort Rock while he does some translations for Balalaika, who could probably provide far more support and protection than she ever could. This seems to be a situation where everyone else believes that Rock and Revy are together, but they aren't. Yet at least. Revy, when they arrive and are walking on the streets, comments about the similarities between Tokyo and New York, and she begins comparing them. She says that the snow isn't as bad in Tokyo, but she hates being reminded of New York City. Happy things didn't exactly happen to Revy there. She finally jokes about getting hit on a few times and says that this country really pisses her off. We then cut back to Rock's first translation scene, wherein Balalaika blows up a building to flex how powerful she is and how much she simply does not give a fuck. The way she times it with the closing of her old-ass phone is perfect. Rock doesn't even bat an eye at this, further proof that he's fundamentally changed as a human being, and that this sort of thing has become normalized in his mind. In the car ride afterwards with Revy, Rock laments Balalaika turning his home into a war zone, but Revy isn't listening and goes on to have an iconic line about Balalaika.
I'm telling you, she gets off on this shit. She'd give up sex before she passed up a war.
Something's wrong.
Rock and Revy decide to stop at a Japanese fair, which is clearly a date activity. We are intentionally being thrown mixed messages by the show here. Revy is then playing and winning at a shooting gallery game. She starts going off about wishing she had her guns here, letting the audience know that she is currently unarmed, and she laments how it's nearly impossible to get into a gunfight in this country. She then notices Rock isn't listening and caringly asks him if he's remembering something. This level of sympathy and care from Revy is quintessentially indicative of her progression as a character. She and the audience both infer that he is thinking about his old life here in Japan and comparing it to his new life in Reupload with her. Revy asks if he wants to meet up with his family, and he recalls her saying that the nosy types weren't too popular, and he avoids the question entirely. Rock then explains that he feels like an outsider in the city he used to live in now. He gives some exposition about his family, and Revy tells him that if his parents are still alive, it's best to visit them now while he still has the chance, because he could die sometime in this line of work. We get a quick glimpse into Revy's past as she compares her family life to Rock's and says that his is pretty normal. She mentions here that Rock still hasn't stolen or killed anybody yet, which is an interesting factoid that may come into play further down the line. She reiterates saying he'll regret it if he doesn't go and see them. Rock says he can't be very normal if he hangs out with people like Revy and they laugh about it together. We having sweet boy and sweet girl moments out here in Black Lagoon. We're witnessing a wholesome date between Rock and Revy. Who would have thought? Revy, who is still playing the shooting gallery game while all this is going on, takes the final shot and fucks it up. It seems like she's distracted, and Rock is affecting her ability to shoot with this conversation. While going through this experience with Rock, it's likely that Revy is also thinking about this place and how peaceful it is, and how much she wishes she could have been a part of this world at some time. This all factors into what I believe Revy wanted all along, what was either her conscious or subconscious reasoning for taking Rock with them back in episode 1. She wanted to run away and get out of this constant death game she's been playing, her whole entire life, and she sees Rock as her lifeline out of it. Balalaika will even make a reference to this in an upcoming scene in an upcoming episode. She ends up trying to cheat and claim the prize anyway, but the game runner notices and calls her out for cheating. Things explode and they create a racket, drawing the attention of Yukio and Genji. Yukio and Genji attempt to keep the peace, but it quickly turns into a subtle dick measuring contest between Genji and Revy. They can clearly smell it on each other. Yukio and Rock somehow de-escalate the situation, and they end up getting drinks together. Once again, we are faced with an obvious parallel. Genji is a parallel to Revy, and Yukio is a parallel to Rock. While drinking, they are hilariously divided on 2 seating benches to emphasize these parallels as Rock and Yukio have a conversation, while Genji and Revy brood on the other side. Revy verbally is pissed about the mood being completely gone for fighting. Yukio and Rock have a scene that plays out like a terrible, awkward teen romantic comedy scene on the other side. That's all in a good way. This situation is intentionally innocent and awkward. They both keep interrupting each other and are being totally overly polite. It completely juxtaposes the entire rest of the show and especially the characters that are sitting right next to them. Rock even shit-talks Revy to Yukio, which is something I doubt he'd say to another girl if he and Revy were in fact together at this point, but he also impresses Yukio unintentionally by nebulously describing his job. Their weird flirty dynamic here adds a subtextual element to this scene that I think eliminates the possibility of Revy and Rock having already gotten together at this point in the series. The idea here and throughout this arc is that Rock and Yukio could have been happy together if the circumstances weren't so fucked up. There's a very interesting Quentin Tarantino quote about Shoshana, a secret Jew in Inglourious Bastards, and Frederick Zolo, a Nazi soldier in Inglourious Bastards, where he says that in a different time and in a different place they could have been together, which is incredibly interesting in the context of Inglourious Bastards itself, but it fits just as well here. Now, this isn't a new storytelling device by any means. The most famous story of all time uses this as its theme, but it still fits here, and it's interesting to think of this as a weird, fucked up Romeo and Juliet parallel. Yukio does take her own life eventually, but we'll get to that later. The point here is that if Rock had met Yukio before he met Revy, things could have been very different for him. But the real question is, would Rock have chosen her and this normal life in Japan over Revy and the outlaw life in Roanopa? But another gigantic layer to this equation is, what would Revy want? Would she be happy if Rock left and lived a normal life, or does she want to replace Yukio in this theoretical situation and live with Rock in Japan and have a normal life? Who knows, but this show has so much depth for us to think about surrounding these two characters, to say the least. We cut back over to Revy, who says if the situation continues, she's going to puke. I think if she and Rock were together, she would have been more jealous of this situation and tried to put a stop to it, but she just jokes about it here. Revy and Genji then acknowledge to each other that they understand the gutter mud situation and that they can sense it on each other. They end up splitting up, and we get Rock's narration about him at the moment not understanding how appealing the draw of the underworld is. He seems to have forgotten that he did the exact same thing in her situation. As a side note, there's a fantastic scene with Balalaika where she embarrassingly absolutely cucks her superior officer in the Russian mafia before walking out on him. Not only this, but later she'll set up this idiot to get cut down by Genji. Not that this has anything to do with Rock or Revy, I was just sharing with the group. Genji and the interim boss of the Washimine clan have a scene where they bring up Rock, who they have been seeing at these meetings. The boss says that he seems like a well-mannered young man, but Revy seems like trouble. They can both sense it. They use the adage that he's a chicken who brings the pot home to cook himself in, which is neatly kind of fitting, especially in this situation here in Japan. We cut to the situation where Rock is outside his family's house and Revy waits outside on a park bench while he goes to visit them. Notably, later on we find out that Rock doesn't actually visit them. Revy gets coerced by some kids into playing a game with them, and she teaches them how to die properly and shows off her shooting ability. This is another wholesome moment with Revy this episode, in possibly the only episode where she isn't armed or ready to kill. I like the neat little symbolism here. She's unarmed, so she's allowed to have fun. This allows her to relax and be a better person playing with these kids. It shows that maybe if she did live in Japan and didn't have to worry about the guns, she could have had a semblance of a normal life. She plays out a scene from the movie with the kids, and it's quite embarrassing. The embarrassment is only furthered when Rock appears earlier than she expected and sees Revy playing with the kids. She gets mad and breaks the kid's toy gun, yelling at Rock and explaining that he isn't allowed to tell anyone about this. Rock then mentions that his parents weren't home, and Revy laughs, knowing that they probably were home, that he just couldn't bring himself to go and visit them. We then get an internal monologue from Revy to end the episode, where she says that she doesn't understand why he won't go and see them, and says that he doesn't belong here with her. This is the first instance we get of Revy overlooking what Rock has become. She isn't paying attention to his actions, and has a glorified perfect picture of him in her mind that isn't real. This will become far more apparent in Roberta's blood trail. We open episode 20 in Chaka's strip club, which is housing our second meeting scene, with Rock once again on translation duties. Periodically throughout the scene, Rock indicates his quiet outrage at certain proposals from Balalaika. Chaka is introduced here as he is loudly yelling at someone over the phone and getting accosted by his superiors for embarrassing them in front of Balalaika. He's a total cunt from the very beginning. We then cut to Yukio and her friend at school. They talk about stories, and she mentions liking stories that offer her an escape from reality and fantasies about being lost at sea. She also notes that she doesn't really like scary novels because the night isn't very attractive to her because it's dark and lonely and sad. She says she's scared of being swallowed up by it and doesn't find it romantic like some people do. This is a masterful scene of foreshadowing, irony, and subtext. A major change in her character coming up is her embrace of the night, which from this point forward in Black Lagoon represents the criminal lifestyle. When she mentions not finding it romantic as another aspect of this monologue she'll change her mind about, obviously she'll eventually find it romantic and want to run away into the darkness, and subtextually the person she's referring to when she talks about people who find it romantic is Rock. And of course Rock ends up being lonely by the end of the show. There's more content here to analyze from thematic standpoints and symbolic standpoints, but I think we'll move on. This video series may be long, but it isn't all-encompassing. There's still things to say about Black Lagoon that we'll leave to the imagination. We cut back to the translation scene and Chaka attempting to hit on Revy. This is a fantastic fucking scene. Revy talks to Rock about being painfully bored by this entire situation. Rock leaves to go piss, leaving her alone, and Chaka sees this as his opportunity. He slams his hand on the wall next to her, a motif going forward in this series following this. Revy looks completely annoyed and uninterested. He shoots his shot and Revy shuts him down immediately. He doesn't give up and starts bragging about running the strip club and that he could only have made this successful if he was good with women. He mentions Roanopa and the reputation that place has, and then asks demeaningly if she's ever shot anyone. He then brags about his own 10 kills. Revy shuts him down perfectly after this.
Romeo, can you handle the truth? Your breath stinks like you've been sucking cock.
It is interesting to point out here that compared to the apparent patriarchal and catcalling infested Japan, Roanopa is weirdly an egalitarian culture. Revy is only ever demeaned as a girl in Japan, here by Chaka. No one in Roanopa ever questions her, and they understand how things work and don't needlessly fuck with Revy. This trope of outsiders not understanding how things work in Roanopa is apparent, and is a part of nearly every arc, with the NSA agents, Jane and her chasers, Roberta, the twins, and everybody. This also might have something to do with the show being written in Japan. It seems that cultures usually put their own culture down and demean it as patriarchal when comparing it to other cultures. This is even reflected in Chaka's speech here, where he has seemingly heard of Roanopa but doesn't fully understand it. Rock then reappears from the bathroom, and to keep some semblance of his masculinity, Chaka beats the shit out of Rock. Rock explains afterwards that it was all a ploy to get Revy to fight him, but since Revy doesn't have her guns, she couldn't have. Revy praises Rock for pointing this out afterwards. Revy comments that she might need her cutlass now, and has another great line.
I won't start anything, but I can tell you right now, at some point, he's gonna turn his gun on us. He's just a poor, dumb fuck who thinks he's got something to prove. We'll give him his fight, but for now, we'll just sit tight. When he draws, he's a fucking dead man.
Benny then appropriately sends Revy's guns over to Japan. Rock and Yukio then coincidentally meet up again at the train station and head to a place together to have a makeshift date/talk. She asks him about visiting his home and he admits to her that he didn't go and that he is avoiding it. He's much more honest here than he is with Revy, which is interesting. She mentions that she didn't used to like her family either, but then she realized that it was the only place she could always return to. They continue with their weird flirting gimmick from the last episode. Rock says that she is beyond wise for her years and that unintentionally makes her insecure about her age, but they then laugh it off. Some wholesome communication before she screams at him that she hates him in a few episodes. Rock then explains that he feels like he's in limbo, not wanting to turn back and come home to Japan, but not necessarily liking the forward-facing direction either, in Roanoke and the further deterioration of his character. This is when Yukio first brings up the dice analogy. Humans choose from a direction to throw themselves making the first move, but the rest is up to chance, is what she's saying here. At least I think that's the foundation of this quote. I thought about reading this French guy's book for the video, but that was a little too much. Personally, I like this analogy. It's a mixture of free will and determinism. You take the first step, but the rest is up to fate. Rock admits that it's hard to face the truth now somehow. He didn't want to take personal responsibility for the situation he's in. Yukio gets a phone call from Genji, and through that situation, Rock figures out that she is indeed tied to the main story, and he has a moment of existential dread. He then confirms these suspicions by asking for her last name, and she confirms that it's Washimane. This is likely when Rock gets it into his head that he has to save her from the darkness surrounding her on all sides, because he sees her as the embodiment of his innocence in Japan. That's the entire point for this arc. Rock tries to save Yukio when she doesn't necessarily want or need saving. And not for her benefit, but just to prove a point to himself. We'll see that play out over the rest of this arc. Yukio is then told by Genji and the interim boss that she must become the leader of the clan for the sake of the family. She agrees, taking responsibility and trying to protect everyone in her family. We cut back to Rock, Revy, and Balalaika at lunch. Rock is clearly not liking the way the situation is playing out and how Yukio is involved. Rock starts questioning Balalaika's tactics and tries to subtly manipulate and convince her into taking certain actions to soften the blow on Yukio. Balalaika then reminds Rock what his role is in this mission and puts him in his place. Revy convinces her that it's harmless to tell Rock the plan since they're on the same side after all. As Balalaika immediately points out, this was very smoothly done by Revy. She's getting much better at talking, which shows some character growth. This is a far cry from the situation in the rip-off church from episode 8. Balalaika explains the situation and it's just as what Rock feared. But he doesn't say anything about it yet. Eventually he's going to have to confront Balalaika about it, and boy is it going to get good. The interim boss decides to commit suicide by Balalaika. He attempts to kill her by rushing her with his sword. She restrains him and makes Rock translate her final message before she snaps his neck. This clearly has an effect on Rock. He remembers this situation through a dream and wakes up next to some alcohol that he had been drinking the previous night to help him forget about the ordeal. Revy wakes him up explaining that Hotel Moscow is preparing for absolute war now. There's a scene with Yukio and Genji where she explains that she can choose to walk the path in the sun, but will force her family to scurry around in the darkness without a leader. She's clearly guilting herself into becoming the leader for everyone else's sake, but she clearly has some determination to do it. She's clearly attracted to the darkness somehow. Genji pleads with her to not take the role because it wasn't meant for her. He's trying to protect her like Revy tries to protect Rock. She then starts to romanticize the darkness that she had rejected previously. She says that she can feel the warmth from the darkness inside Genji. She begins to fully embrace the darkness by accepting the position and mentioning that for the first time she finds the winter darkness beautiful. She then asks Genji for his protection in her mission and he jumps at the opportunity. He seems to have been wandering around without a purpose since her father died, and he's ready to devote himself to her. The episode ends with Rock reiterating the quote with a dice with a text note appearing on the screen in French. Episode 21 opens with a juicy flashback to Balalaika's childhood. She makes it her goal to be an Olympian and hopes to restore the reputation of her family, that for some reason that isn't stated here is disgraced in the Soviet Union. Maybe this is a context clue I'm missing about something to do with the war, but it's not necessarily outrightly stated here, so I'm unsure. She clearly comes from a wealthy background. The place she is walking through looks like Garcia's mansion. This represents that she's from wealth, but also maybe that they reuse some assets here. We then cut to her on a battlefield in Afghanistan. She is notably shown not shooting civilians in the middle of the conflict, and seems to still have some moralistic virtue at this point in her life. We then see her watching the 1992 Olympics as her contemporaries compete and an American girl wins the gold medal, which feeds into the American and Soviet Union conflict at play here. We then see the foundation of Hotel Moscow after they had disbanded from the military following the collapse of the Soviet Union. The world of Midnight plays here, which is weird, but it sort of fits, and I still got chills. This 2-minute segment here is fantastic characterization for Balalaika and perfectly shows her fall from grace. She threw herself into the military just as Yukio said with the dice and ended up, through circumstance, not living her dream of being an Olympian and becoming a mafia leader at the edge of the world. There's a lot of regret in Balalaika here, and this also draws a parallel to Yukio. They're both thrusted into military or combat-related things for their family. They see it as a guiding principle to undisgrace their families. I think Balalaika's anger and lust for war are justified through this explanation. She just wants to go back to a nostalgic period of glory and purpose. We then get a scene of Yukio's indoctrination. She leaves her school library for the final time with her friend, and a dozen cars laced with Yakuza show up to escort her home. Her friend notices the change in behavior after Yukio praises the winter night sky. This is showing direct contradiction to what Yukio said in the last episode and showing that she's further embracing this type of lifestyle. Yukio tells her friend to try and get along with her mother before leaving, and she never looks back. This is the final step. She cannot go back now. She has thrown herself into the underworld, and with retrospect, this scene is only made more tragic. The war then occurs. Yukio shows some insight and seems to be tactful just like Rock, but Balalaika tricks her into attacking a pre-existing Russian mafia in Tokyo. More importantly, she sends Genji to kill the dude from the last episode. We then see Revy picking up her guns and jumping into the back of a taxi with Rock. Rock starts talking about Yukio and at least wanting to warn her about what's going on. The point here is that Rock thinks Yukio is completely innocent in the situation and has no idea what's actually going on around her, because in fact she is at the center of all of this, pouring gasoline on the fire. Does this sound familiar? This is exactly what happens with Rock and Revy in Roberta's blood trail. Revy thinks Rock is innocent in all this, and only in the final episode does she figure out that the moral arbiter that she had in her mind that she placed on such a platform had entirely disappeared. We'll get into that in the next video, but the parallel still stands. Rock continues saying that she isn't like them and that things are different here and she doesn't belong in their world. The parallel goes even deeper. Revy nearly said the exact same thing about Rock earlier in the show. Rock is being massively hypocritical here. He hated it when Revy said this kind of stuff to him, but now he's projecting it onto Yukio. Revy says Tokyo is now exactly like Roanapa and that Balalaika is going to deal with the Washimine clan the way she would deal with her enemies in Roanapa. Rock still won't give up and still wants to help somehow. Revy then shifts the conversation subject to him, and she explains that he's on the edge of the cliff and that this is his last chance to pull back before jumping headfirst into the darkness. She's giving him one last out to go see his family and settle in Japan. Revy is acting in the exact same way Rock is acting towards Yukio here. This is just one big circle of misrepresentation and hypocrisy. And by God, if it isn't the funnest thing ever to watch unfold. Revy then totally caves to Rock and says that he's the boss on the mission and that her only role is to protect him, and so she goes along with him. Whether Revy wants to admit it or not, she's clearly softening through her time with Rock. Balalaika has a weirdly endearing scene with a hotel employee and even admits that he's at the peak of his adorableness. This is a weirdly great scene.
Miss, Vlatinera?
That's right.
Thanks for everything. If there's anything else, please don't hesitate to ask.
That boy is at the peak of his adorableness.
We then see Yukio get kidnapped by Chaka and she gets beat up by one of his men in the process. Getting the shit kicked out of you seems to be a qualifying necessity for entering the criminal underworld. It seems to be a toughening up technique that the show uses to see if someone can handle the stress of the criminal lifestyle. Rock got the shit kicked out of him by Revy and Dutch and then entered, and now Yukio's doing the same thing here. It seems like you have to be destroyed before embracing this lifestyle. This is represented in all of the characters. Then the dude that beat her up gets beaten to death right in front of her by Chaka. This just shows that he's a big fucking prick. Rock and Revy arrive at the location hoping to warn Yukio, but all they see is the aftermath. Rock is shown running inside like an idiot, charging to save the princess. This is pretty pathetic on Rock's part. Revy does get mad at his stupidity, and Rock then declares that it wasn't Balalaika that did this. Genji shows up and assumes that they are responsible and attacks them. It turns into a standoff between Revy and Genji, further building anticipation for their upcoming fight. They agree to work together to get her back, and Rock tries to give a speech about saving Yukio, but Genji doesn't listen and just tries to get the job done. They steal a car and get out of there, heading for Chaka's location. The car ride is full of fun character interactions and great dialogue, but it all comes to an end when they arrive at the location and prepare to murder these idiots. Rock is told to go in through the back door, and the ending speech from Revy is unbelievably awesome.
No problem. Once the fighting begins, our instincts will take over and that'll be it. No preparation necessary.
It's just how we're made.
And that's the end of episode 21. We open the episode with Chaka being an especially big piece of shit. He's threatening to have Yukio sold off to a pervert and being repeatedly raped. This is notably like the only time we ever see any bad guy threaten one of the female characters with rape. Obviously we see it with Revy in her backstory, but this is the first time we see it. This is a welcome fucking addition for Black Lagoon, especially coming off Berserk and Vinland Saga where it happens all the time. This is all just set up for the eventual catharsis of seeing him getting carved to pieces by Genji. Speaking of which, Revy and Genji then bust through the front door and begin the slaughter. All of these men in there are absolute amateurs and are immediately turned into paste. Chaka continues to show no sympathy for his men and further gets turned on by Revy's murderous abilities. He tries to retreat with Yukio, but Rock sets a trap for him and knocks him the fuck out with a bowling pin.
Fuck you!
Revy is shown slaughtering idiots, even the ones that are begging for mercy. There are even dudes that try to run away, but Revy shoots him in the back. Revy is ruthless here. She may have been softening for Rock, but she still has her murderous tendencies. Then we get a comparable shot of Chaka shooting his own men in the back as they try to flee. Revy and Chaka then have their confrontation. Chaka reiterates on really wanting to fuck Revy, but she tells him to fuck off again. He says that as soon as their can hits the ground, they shoot. Revy ignores him and knees him directly in the face and verbally castrates him.
You wanted to challenge me to a gunfight? Don't make me laugh. You think I'd waste the energy drawn on a third-rate sack of shit like you, dumb fuck?
She leads him to Genji, who she wants to see finish him off. Chaka tries to control the situation, saying that he's already killed Yukio, but everyone sees right through his bullshit and Genji charges at him. Chaka takes his shot and then Revy carves the bullet in two. Revy appropriately freaks the fuck out. He cuts Chaka's hands off and leaves him to drown in the pool. Revy spits on him for good measure. Cut back to Rock and Yukio, who have as similar as you can get scene to the cigarette kiss scene, but only if everything was flipped upside down. This is another explosion of emotions and a conversation that changes both of these characters forever. The main point of this great scene that everyone should go back and rewatch is that Yukio is rejecting Rock's help and getting extremely angry at him for projecting himself onto her and trying to convince her she's wrong just to satisfy himself. She repeatedly says that he only wants to save himself. She ultimately ends the scene by saying that she chose this for herself. She threw her dice, she threw herself in this direction, all the way into the darkness. And that because he still stands in the twilight that he couldn't possibly understand what she's going through, and because he stands in the twilight that she hates him by proxy. Rock is left in awe of this conversation. At the beginning of this scene he was pathetically acting as her protector with broom in hand, and by the end she exposes him for his hypocrisy and tells him to fuck off. Seriously, this scene is unbelievably great, and the way she shuts him down at every turn is astounding to watch. Please go back and watch this again. Rock then flashes back to the submarine conversation with Revy and laments that all this time has passed, yet he still cannot change the person he wants to save. He is still powerless. He's given up on saving Revy, but she hasn't given up on saving him. But eventually he chooses, and he chooses to join her, killing any hope that she may have had of him saving herself. Talking about Revy here. This show at its core is a clusterfuck of miscommunication and complex characters. All the best shows are. Everyone in this show wants to save each other, but in doing so doom themselves, and because they all care about each other, they all suffer together. But at least at the end of the series, Rock and Revy seem to agree to suffer together. Hopefully Guts and Casca decide to do the same thing, but that's for another day. Back on track here. He then continues his introspection. He is watching Powerless as she spirals into Revy's world where she doesn't belong. He then replays my favourite line from the whole series, I'm right here where I'm sitting, Revy, I'm not anywhere else. He rejects this line, saying it was a lie, because he isn't sitting anywhere right now. We briefly cut back to Genji and Revy and we see them continuing to drown Chaka. Immediately we are brought back to the conversation and she continues to expose him, saying that he only went to Roanapa because he was looking for something exciting. She basically brings up all the subtext relating to Rock's character throughout the series up until this point to the surface here, for him and the audience to think about. She reiterates that Rock can't let her die because that would mean that the normal life that he still holds on to will finally be gone, and that he will be forced to completely move forward into the darkness. She then gives the line that I mentioned earlier about envying his freedom and hating him because of it. This is a perfect fucking ripping apart of a character, and seeing him deal with it is only going to get more interesting. We cut back to Genji finishing off the kill. Revy puts over how fucking unbelievable it was that he cut a bullet in half, and motions for them to recreate the moment. Genji denies this and says that he doesn't want to kill her because he owes her for this favor. They tease the fight further, but this won't be paid off until the end of the arc. They reunite and leave. Yukio finishes the scene, praying that she never sees Rock again. The episode then ends with Balalaika laying the groundwork for the finalization of the war preparations, and we once again see a flashback of Balalaika's childhood. The final shot of the episode is Rock longingly looking at the ground in introspection after being exposed by Yukio. He has a whole lot to think about now. You open episode 23 with Hotel Moscow fucking shit up around Tokyo, successfully destroying the Yakuza groups like they were children. Yukio figures out that Hotel Moscow acts more like a military than a mafia. Her lack of understanding of this from the beginning shows that she's in way over her head. We see Rock and Revy having a drink because Balalaika isn't exactly doing meetings right now. Revy is just buzzed because she got to meet someone like Genji in Japan, which she did not expect, and Rock is all fucked up over what happened with Yukio. Revy says that she's itching to take a crack at him herself, and Rock says that she may as well just kill herself if that's the case. Rock seemingly doesn't have a lot of confidence in her, which judging from what happens in the next episode, he probably should have way more confidence in her, at least her fighting abilities. Revy then brings up the point that they are already the Walking Dead. This is the first time she uses this line, I think, though I could be mistaken, and it's one of her favourites. She goes on to explain that everyone in Reupload is already dead, and this is the world of the living here in Japan. Revy talks about the power the Walking Dead wield because they don't fear death. Rock gets pissy and says that she'd rather die in some gutter somewhere, and she points out how bitchy he's being today. He admits to being bitchy and Revy forgives him because she's the nicest person ever now, apparently. At least to Rock. We cut back to Yukio, who then disbands the clan, realizing that they are in an unwinnable situation after she's updated on the number of casualties from the recent raids. She decides that her and Genji will continue the battle alone, but tells all the others to lie in wait until the day she raises the Washimine clan flag again. They then rob a bank using the same vehicles that Hotel Moscow troops are using to get around the city, making the police chase after the vehicles the soldiers are in, which even Balalaika admits to be a clever tactic. This really doesn't delay the onslaught though. Back with Yukio, she talks about how exhilarating it is to rob a bank, and her and Genji together agreed to go to Reupload and wage war there, which is an obviously terrible plan. She then mentions that she always wanted a normal life, but concludes that this life of crime might be even more fun than that. She also figures out that Balalaika is hiding at the port. We then interestingly cut back to Reupload, where all hell seems to be breaking loose, because of Balalaika and Hotel Moscow's absence. Dutch mentions that the Triad is doing what they can to keep the peace, but they're not being that effective. Dutch then foreshadows a later scene by explaining to Benny that it's lucky for them that Rock hasn't had to shoot a gun, yet because if he shoots like he talks then the bullets would ricochet back at them. Benny laughs, but Dutch clearly isn't joking. As we'll see in the very next scene, this is bewilderingly true. We then cut to that scene, and this is another one of the best scenes in the entire show, maybe even my overall favourite, and you could definitely describe this as an explosion of emotions. The scene starts with Balalaika being late to a meet-up with Rock and Revy and apologises for being late. She then lets them know what is about to happen, that this will likely be their final meeting in the mission. Rock remembers the Yukio situation and remembers that if he wants to save her, then this is the only opportunity he has to convince Balalaika not to destroy the Washimine clan. Rock starts reasoning with her, saying that she doesn't need to continue this war because she's already won. Revy calls him a dumbass for speaking up, but he ignores her completely and continues. Balalaika interrupts him and tells him that he is in no position to be talking like this. She's politely telling him to shut the fuck up here. Revy tries to warn him again to stop, but after this he starts talking about justice and Balalaika snaps. She remembers all the injustices against her and her fellow soldiers following the collapse of the Soviet Union and doesn't want to hear this coming from Rock. She grabs Rock and throws him onto the front of the car with a gun pointed directly at his head. The situation then most notably becomes a standoff because Revy pulls her gun on Balalaika and the Hotel Moscow commander, and in turn, the Hotel Moscow commander dude pulls his gun on Revy. Revy cares so much about this moron that she's literally willing to pull her gun on fucking Hotel Moscow here. Back in the arc with the twins, she wasn't even willing to do this for hundreds of thousands of dollars, but for Rock she doesn't even hesitate. Character growth is fun to watch sometimes. The tension in this scene is the selling point. If ever there was a time for a main character to die, it probably would be in this moment and by the hands and the force of Hotel Moscow. They've been built up from the beginning as people that you don't needlessly fuck with, and right now Rock is poking the biggest bear possible. Revy internally monologues how fucked they are and then tries to put her recently upgraded speaking skills into use by trying to calm everyone down. Balalaika tells her to shut it and actually calls her Revy instead of Two Hands. Everyone's trigger fingers start twitching to add to the monumental amounts of tension going around. Balalaika then lets out a massive tirade about the stupidity of the concept of justice, which is again fueled by her past. She sees right through Rock's ploy here. She explains that Rock is trying to get her to kill the people that he wants to be dead. He's not being moral in this situation, he just wants to try to prove to Yukio that he was right, and she was wrong. This to Rock is a matter of pride. Rock quivers as she destroys his arguments and his morality bullshit. She continues to monologue and Revy starts sensing that this isn't going to end well and tries to calm everyone down one more time. All the voice acting here is outstanding. Balalaika says she's amused by Rock's outbursts, and Revy reiterates saying that her fingers are twitching. Balalaika says everyone here's life is insignificant and the plan in Hotel Moscow will be fine without all of them. This is Balalaika embodying what Revy is talking about earlier in the episode about not fearing death. Revy isn't necessarily scared of her life here, but more of Rock's life. Revy reiterates again, saying that she isn't in the fucking mood right now. Balalaika then shifts the conversation entirely over to Revy directly. Balalaika seems to be surprised that she is risking her life for Rock. She alludes to Revy wanting Rock to save her, and this is referred to in Roberta's blood trail when Fabiola points out that Revy wants Rock to be her knight in shining armor. But Balalaika puts down this concept, saying that it will only bring her disappointment here. Revy responds nervously, saying and repeating that she knows, and that Rock can't save her, but secretly we understand that she still has hope that it's possible. Revy says that she's just about reached her limit. Rock ignores Revy's repeated pleas and pipes back up again and is clearly willing to die for his intellectual pride. He is now the one reiterating, and Revy calls him a fucking idiot. She is unbelievably pissed at him for the first time in a while here. Balalaika then goes over the two things you're supposed to remember when someone is holding a gun at your head. 1, to try and entertain the person, and 2, to give them a valid reason to let you live. Rock hasn't done either one of these things. Balalaika asks him what obligation he has to save them anyway. He explains that she is misunderstanding the situation and admits that he's lost the moral high ground here, and that he's doing this because it's his hobby. Balalaika finds this amusing. He says that some people like to die in gutters, which is a reference to Revy, and that some people like to go to war, which is a reference to Balalaika, but he likes to save people. This is a low-key insult on both of them. He says that he is no different from her, which she finds hilarious and decides to let him go. Balalaika walks away like nothing happened, simply saying that things are going to pick up again tomorrow. Everyone puts their guns away, and she says next time he shouldn't risk his life on these stupid little games. She then reiterates on the pecking order and makes him park the car, asserting her dominance once again. Revy gets extremely mad and physically grabs him. They had made such great progress together, but Rock repeatedly disrespected her just now and nearly got them both killed. He didn't just endanger his life with this gamble, but hers as well. She continues to yell, explaining that she can't protect someone who's trying to get killed. She then calms down a bit. Rock ignores her again and says that he's going home one final time. He loved the thrill from that last encounter and has decided that he isn't going back anymore. We get an internal monologue from Revy with her explaining that she doesn't need Balalaika to tell her that she can't have a life like this. She says that she survived on dirty air for her entire life. Revy seems to be under the assumption that Rock is still not going back with her, and tells him to go wake up from his nightmare, but she clearly isn't happy with this supposed decision. In her mind, he's abandoning her for something that she could never provide for him. Rock finally lets her know that he's already dead and that he died the moment he met her. He talks about this place seeming so familiar to him once, but now that it feels like a mirage. He explains that they came here for him to forget about his life. He wants to see what's going to happen if he continues down this path rather than turning back now. Revy warns him that he'll regret it. He says he stopped regretting things a year ago, but didn't have the resolve to let go until now. Revy says she understands. The kids from the previous episode come back and recognize Revy and ask her to show them the trick again. Rock encourages her, telling her to put on a show. There is one big difference between this time and last time. Revy has her guns now and she shoots the cans with real bullets and all the kids freak out. This is the first time ever that Rock has encouraged Revy to get violent. He really is moving deeper into her world now. Revy and Rock walk off together looking really cool, and Revy calls the kids brats and tells them to go home. Rock doesn't look back. The episode ends with Yukio asking to receive a new, more powerful gun. She explains that she wants to be able to pull her own weight from now on, especially now that they are planning to go to Roanapa. Episode 24 has a cold open and it seems fitting for the finale of Season 2. Genji and Yukio are talking about their goals of raising the flag of justice on foreign soil and reiterate on their plan to foolishly go to Roanapa. We then cut to Rock, who's being joined by Balalaika, who praises him for his work he apparently did off screen. She says the job will now end without incident. They are acting incredibly cool considering what happened presumably yesterday. We see the police setting up a barricade outside the building that they are currently in. These are not the cops in Reupload. Balalaika asks him that if he has a favor other than the one they talked about yesterday, and Rock asks for her to destroy the Washimane clan, which is the exact opposite of what he asked yesterday. He reasons that if they destroy the Washimane clan, Yukio will be forced to return to her old normal life. Balalaika understands what he's saying and sees through him again. She slams her hand next to his head in the exact same way Chaka did to Revy in a previous episode, and she praises him, saying that there may still be hope for him. Balalaika is taking a similarly flirty approach with Rock that she took with Chang back in the Twins arc. The meeting goes to plan for Balalaika. She manipulates them into revealing their firearm capabilities and kills them with their supposedly subpar guns. This was clearly the plan from the beginning. Rock seems to get caught off guard by this, but he should have assumed something like this would happen. This is what he wished for originally, after all. Balalaika laments the gun not being so worthless after all after she's killed everyone with it. She dumps the gun in the artificial lake outside while the cops try to rush in the building because they heard the gunshots. Rock has a moment of reflection, accepting that he asked for this to happen and that these people are dead because of him. He is slipping drastically now into the darkness. They are confronted by the police, but a Russian embassy car pulls up to escort Balalaika out of the area, and Rock is picked up by Revy, who comes in charging on a motorbike. Before they left, Balalaika informed Rock that the princess had already disbanded the clan, and that he doesn't give her enough credit. She then tells him about Yukio's plan to raise the Washimane clan flag in Reupload. Rock is adequately shocked by this admittedly awful plan. Balalaika also amusingly demeans the civilian cops as she walks past them. Rock now still wants to see Yukio one last time just to tell her that the war's over and that she can return to her normal life if she wants to. Revy warns him that the stakes are about to get far higher than he can comprehend, and that soon the entire area will be under quarantine. They need to get the fuck out of Dodge fast. They then crash right into Yukio and Genji. At first I thought this was terribly convenient, but they do have that police radio that they could have been tracking them with. So the crashing scenario could have been intentional. They kidnap Rock and this is beginning to get annoying. Revy gets pissed and chases after them, because that's who she is now. In the car, Rock and Yukio get to talk like Rock desperately wanted. Rock starts questioning Yukio about everything. Initially he asks her if she's even old enough to drive, which I thought was a fantastic indicator of the entire situation. Rock desperately needs to stop babying this girl. He then explains to them that going to Reupload is fucking stupid, but Yukio says it sounds fun. Which again is exactly what Rock thought, so he's being a total hypocrite here for being mad at her. He explains further that the war is done and that none of this fighting is necessary anymore, but Yukio says Balalaika isn't to be trusted. She doesn't care. She's set in this plan of going to Reupload and nothing Rock is going to say is going to change that. We then see Revy carjack a truck and chase after them. Rock explains that he has no value as a hostage, and Yukio responds saying that they will just use him as a shield then, which is a brutal comeback. She says that she wants Rock to see how this all ends. Rock reiterates that they are just going to get absolutely slaughtered, and Yukio tries some poetic line about flowers blooming as they die, and how that somehow relates to Yakuza. Rock appropriately facepalms, knowing that she is totally lost now. Revy shows up in the truck and starts ramming them from the side. Yukio says that they cannot give way in this battle as both charge for the ocean, but Rock takes over the wheel and makes them drift before they hit the water. Rock tells Revy that she was always right and that Yukio has already accepted that she's the Walking Dead. It's finally time for Revy and Genji to have their highly anticipated fight. While they are fighting and while Genji cuts another bullet in half, Rock and Yukio continue their conversation. Genji talks to Revy also while the fight is going on and says that the two of them will never be normal and that this is how it's meant to be. Rock tells Yukio there was a path she could have taken to not end up like Balalaika and that he had assumed that if given the opportunity she would have chosen that one. He proposes the idea that Yukio only did all this because she wanted to be with Genji, who reminded her of all the good times in her life, and that they could have run away together and been happy. This is painfully ironic and hypocritical since the exact same thing could be said about Rock and Revy. Yukio makes fun of the idea, saying that it sounds like a romantic comedy. She says that she's already through her dice, and that now she is dealing with the consequences. Rock is calm here and once again trusts in Revy's ability to win. Genji overhears Yukio talking about the peaceful times, and then Revy takes advantage of this momentary lapse in reason, and in his hesitation kills him. Revy also gets badly skewered in the shin. Rock goes on a monologue about the inevitability of both of them dying in the mud. Genji's last words are Yukio before he collapses. Rock runs over to Revy and helps her with her sword issue. Revy notes that she only won because Rock got Yukio to distract him by talking about the past, which means effectively that Yukio killed Genji. Rock tells her not to talk anymore because he has to remove the sword from her shin and that it's going to hurt quite a bit. Revy screams in pain and it's perfectly acted. You have to hear it. It's some crazy shit.
Ready?
Yukio then walks over and picks up Genji's sword. Rock tells her that this all happened because she lied to herself and said she wanted this. He still won't allow her to be responsible for herself and has to be proven right here. Yukio ignores him, saying that 11 people died because of her orders since she initially threw the dice, and that she sees now that she has woken up that Roanopa does not have a place for her. She concludes saying that it's better if this all ends now. She apologizes for any trouble she may have caused and motions the sword to her throat. Revy, seeing this, screams for Rock to not look, wanting to shield him from this brutal suicide, but he ignores her again and just looks directly forward, watching Yukio kill herself. This is another amazing scene I demand you go back and rewatch.
I think it's best if I bring all of this to an end now.
Don't look at her, Rock! Look at me!
She died just as the twins did near the ocean, watching the sky as she sleeps. It happened again. Rock hasn't been able to save anyone he wanted to save. He will never make this mistake again, no matter the cost. We cut back to Roanopa to end the episode in the second season. Dutch is on the phone with Rock, who quotes the dice analogy to Dutch. He clearly won't be forgetting about this situation anytime soon. Dutch responds with another analogy talking about the guy who tries to put 5 eggs in 3 baskets. What Dutch means by this is that he's noticed that Rock is trying to do far too much. Dutch informs him about the next job and reassures him that the wheel will just keep on turning. Revy, who is still on crutches, is shown with him again as they leave. The episode fades out with the original ED for the final time. We cut back for a post-credit scene where Benny gives Rock the letter from Balalaika. Inside is a picture of Yukio with a red cross lined through it, obviously representing her death. This is a token for Rock to never forget. As I said before, he won't be forgetting about this situation anytime soon. Benny looks off into the city and sarcastically laments it not being that bad of a place. Rock states that he wants to continue watching it occur from the twilight, and we'll see how long that lasts. We then cut back to Eddie and Revy drinking in the chapel again. Etta asks her if she got any on the trip since they were together alone for such a long time, and Revy says she doesn't want to say. Etta continues to laugh at her, and Revy pulls her gun and says, "We fuckers don't die too easy, bang," to end the season. Obviously Etta isn't dead here, and this was just a final fan service scene to end the season and possibly the whole show at this point in time. The showrunner probably didn't know there was going to be a 3rd season at this point and thought this was just a neat little way to end it. Ultimately, Season 2 is far better to me than Season 1. The twins, the stuff with Etta and the Jane arc, and the masterpiece of a Japan arc propel this season far beyond even the final 2 episodes of Season 1, and even the fantastic Episode 7 of Season 1. Season 1 had some great moments, but Season 2 is where the arc structure comes into its own, and we get some of the best character interactions and moments in the entire series. This is also the most time we get to spend with Rock and Revy together. In Roberta's Blood Trail, they surprisingly don't have many scenes together, but Roberta's Blood Trail is an entirely different beast. Stick around for part 4 to hear all about that. So guys, that's it for part 3 of my Rock and Revy analysis. Part 4 will be out hopefully before the end of the month. Hopefully this video got out before the 10th or on the 10th. I beg that happened. I have no idea. I'm recording the final outro of the script here on the 6th of the 6th, so who knows. I got 4 days. I got about 25 minutes edited at this point. I have a feeling it's probably going to be an hour and 20 minutes, an hour and a half long. Who knows? You can see it. You just watched it all, presumably. But it's really important. The support links are in the description below. I got a lot more patrons because of this series, and it's definitely incentive to get this the last part of this series out quicker than usual. If obviously people have put money behind their promises and their wants for this series, then it's going to drive me to get it out far quicker. I haven't started reading the manga yet. This script was written, I think, back in February, and it's been 4 months, and I've finally got it out. It's been one hell of a ride, but it's really important. The support links are all in the description below. There's Patreon, Streamlabs, the Twitter. For more minor updates, I'll be posting them to Twitter from now on. I really don't have a following at all on Twitter. I've just been lurking on Twitter for a couple of years, and I think it's finally time that we step out with that. So follow that there in the description links below. Subscribe. I get a lot of recurring viewers on this. It's probably the best content I put out. And I got about 200 subscribers as of recording this, and I presume it'll be the same as of releasing this video. But yeah, so keep in mind, keep up with all the things. Part 4 should be out before the end of the month, let's hope. We only got 5 episodes, but I'm pretty sure the script is just as long as the first 2 were. Obviously, I split the first one into 2 separate videos just to get it out there. But I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope it lived up to the limited hype it had. And I'd just like to say thanks.